Hi, and welcome to another episode on the Religion of Human Nature podcast. I have a very special episode today where we're discussing political discourse and how we talk to people on either other sides of the aisles or with different political beliefs than we have. And I have two special guests because I know them and have lived with one, Jeremy Hobson, who was the host of Here and Now on NPR for many years. We were in the fraternity together back in college before he left us all behind in Champaign. Jeremy, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Jeremy. Good to talk to you.
Good to talk to you. And another dear friend of mine, Gabe Roth, who is the executive director of Fix the Court, an organization he's going to tell us a little bit about in a little bit. Gabe, how's New York City?
I'm good. I'm a little bummed there wasn't a shout out about how we used to live together in our last year of Camp Bunk.
That's true. Actually, that's fair. You have both been roommates of mine. That's right.
Actually, Jeremy, I got to say, I think you were the person who told me to turn on the TV on 9/11.
I was. It is actually one of the most important moments of my life, is telling someone who actually covered the story that it was happening. You're like, no, it's not a.
Come on, that's not. You're joking. Yeah. Wow.
It's not something. It's not news you usually wake up to. It was an emotional day. I remember on campus, obviously, for weeks, months, and obviously, Jeremy, you were an important part of that. People still don't believe to me today when I tell them one of my college friends had to cover the story. Like, they didn't understand, but he was in college. And like, well, he was very good at what he does. So it's a compliment to you. I want to start, Jeremy, with you. And you had such an important show. And you've interviewed so many people. What happens when you begin and you're orchestrating an interview or a conversation with someone who really has difficult points of view for you to grapple with, or just very much you disagree with them? How do you keep that, that experience and that conversation going?
I mean, I think that I always have to start from the perspective of my audience and my listeners, and making sure that I am the advocate for them, and asking the questions that they would want to know the answers to, but also being prepared enough to respond when somebody says something that needs to be corrected, or that there's another viewpoint for. I'll just give you an example. I was interviewing Ben Carson, the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, right after Trump went into the, cleared the area at Lafayette Square with the tear gas, and then went in and stood with the Bible in front of the church. And we got an interview with Ben Carson, and I did it, and I, prepared for it. And one of the things that I discovered in my reading over I had about 12 hours notice I was going to talk to him. And one of the things I discovered was that they were saying that it wasn't tear gas. And so I was reading up about that. And it turned out that, in fact, the chemical that they used, while it's not tear gas, it is commonly referred to as tear gas. And so then I bring that up and I said, was it really necessary for you to use tear gas on these peaceful protesters? And he goes, well, it wasn't tear gas. And I was ready to say that, in fact, it's commonly referred to as tear gas. But the point is, I think, you have to be ready. You have to be prepared. You have to have some sense also that helps you to have a little bit of a sense of what they're going to say. Maybe you don't. Maybe they say something totally that is unexpected and you have to react in the moment. But you've got the listener in mind the whole time. You've got, you're an advocate for the people that are hearing you.
That's great. And it's important I think part of the debates is that we are prepared, right? So Gabe, you absolutely deal with debates, quite literally.
All the time. And it's funny because I've also interviewed Ben Carson, but we can talk about that later.
So Gabe, tell us a little bit about Fix the Court and what sort of you guys do, and what happens when you meet sort of that friction on the other side of sort of what you're trying to do.
Sure. So we, Fix the Court is the only national nonpartisan organization that's solely dedicated to improving transparency and accountability in the federal judiciary. So that's both the Supreme Court and the lower federal courts. There's 13 appeals courts and 94 trial courts in the federal level, in addition to the Supreme Court. And we work there's direct lobbying to the courts, to the judges. I know many of them. We also work with members of Congress on the left and the right to try to pass laws or resolutions, trying to get the courts to open up. And the general theory behind my organization is there's 3 branches of government. Congress has oversight, the executive branch has oversight, and there's a real lack of oversight in the judiciary. And at a time when the courts are playing such a central role in our lives, I think way more than the founders intended, way more than it was when we all were kids, in terms of being the final arbiters on everything from marriage to healthcare to guns to the presidential election, the past one and possibly the one that's ongoing now at the time of your recording. If they're going to have this outsized role in American life, they have to have some backstops, some accountability and transparency measures akin to what the other branches have. So yeah, we get a lot of reticence on that. I mean, there are folks that don't believe that Congress can enact laws to stop the courts from being opaque. That's not true, but I hear separation of powers issues all the time. Members within the judiciary itself, I wrote a letter with a bunch of folks, a bunch of other groups trying to get the courts to open up all of their election-related hearings to live audio and video, and they don't want to do that, right? They don't want cameras in the courtroom, and the live audio that they're allowing, they're really only allowing it for COVID, so it's not really set up very well. And, you know, I think that it's hard. What's really changed, though, in the last few months is that this has become, you know, the courts have become a political football in ways that I hadn't expected, right? So, like, there are folks on the left that want to add 6 justices to the Supreme Court. And there are folks on the right that are claiming that this whole idea of changing the makeup of the court doesn't comport with the Constitution or American history. I mean, I think both arguments are cockamamie. The court has changed size a dozen times, and Congress has every right to do what it wants. But on the one hand, on the other hand, the last time it was changed, and this number of the justices on the court tried, it was a big national crisis. So, you know, I try to, my own political views aside, though I'm fairly lucky that this aligns fairly well with my political views, but I try to keep things in the 40-yard lines. I try to, you know, explain to folks that transparency and accountability aren't partisan issues just because a bill might have more Democrats than Republicans. Everything that I do, I try to pitch to both sides. And I think that there's just a basic expectation of accountability in modern governance. And my job is to sort of prove it to both parties, right? The most conservative Republican staffer reached out to me, and one of the most liberal Democrat staffer, like, this exists, maybe not when the cameras are off, but behind the scenes, I do think there is a lot of places that we can work together. It's just, it does get increasingly hard when, you know, the court itself is just become such a hot button issue that that the idea of working together isn't as sexy as it was when the courts were sort of in the background.
Yeah. So we're, for those who are listening, this is going to come out a few weeks later, but it is November 5th. It's middle of the day, and we still do not have an announced president of the United States. So for those in context, if, you know, who knows what's going to happen, this will be released for a couple of weeks. And so, you know, I'm watching sort of the news, and maybe I'll throw this out to either of you. And it still seems like there's a breakdown in how we speak to one another. The way I'm watching the country, and that there's, you know, they're talking about blue waves and red waves. And if you look at a map, there's a lot of blue and a lot of red. And, you know, even if the populist vote is 3 million and they're saying the largest gap that's ever been in the popular vote, it's still like 51%, 49, 50-50. So how do we go about, obviously, what the strategies anyone used over the last 4 years in a way to talk to people kindly and have real conversations has not improved. I'm going to make that statement. Maybe you guys don't have to, but yeah, well, Jeremy.
You know, I think this may sound silly 2 weeks from now, but two things that struck me on election night as I was watching what was going on was, number one, our polling is a disaster. And number two, I think the media have done a very bad job of getting outside of their own bubbles. I think the fact that they were so shocked that certain places in this country, you know, Texas and Ohio and Florida, were further to the right and didn't go for Joe Biden, it speaks to the fact that a lot of the people in the media, and I've been in the media for 20 years, aren't actually getting outside of their bubbles and speaking to people who don't agree with them, or they're tuning in to news that is, coming from one side and not looking at the other. I think the other piece of that is that this whole thing about the hidden Trump voter, the Trump voter who doesn't want to tell the pollster that they're voting for Trump because it's just too much of a pain to get into that discussion with somebody. And I think that says something right there, that people don't feel comfortable, that it's become so divisive that we can't even have, people can't even have friends that are on the other side of the political spectrum, when in fact, like, if you think about it, most things that we actually have a lot in common with everybody in this country, even if we're not, politically aligned on various issues. I think that we have become more scared to talk to one another and be, those relationships are, I think, central to what's going on in this country right now. We're moving apart and getting into our little bubbles and not mixing and mingling in a way that would probably improve a lot of things if we did.
All right. Perfectly said. Gabe, you want to add anything?
Oh, I completely disagree with all of that. Where to begin? I think that look, to be honest though, I go back and forth. I think that in some respects, yes, the media needs to leave New York and Los Angeles and Chicago, and it's important to I mean, it's always made fun of when the New York Times discovers the Alabama part of Pennsylvania or whatever, but that's the central in between Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. That's an old political saw. But anyway, I think that is, that sentiment is important, and it's good, and it's positive in a Jeb Bush world, right? I like to see things. I'm very moderate politically. I've always been. I'm from Tennessee. I voted for Democrats and Republicans in the past, but we're not in a Jeb Bush, Joe Biden's sort of like the typical old school Democratic moderate. I don't know how we deal with this just sort of outlandish, lie-filled, just totally divorced from reality part of the country, and it's a dangerous situation, right? And even if you don't agree that it's dangerous and it's like the people that are voting for Trump are still, by and large, more homophobic, more racist, more xenophobic than the rest of the population. And though there is, I think, opportunities to bridge certain gaps, I don't think that there's enough that we're ever going to get 30 to 40% of the country to sort of say, okay, let's, agree with Black folks when they say that their life experience is harder than your rural whiteness or whatever. So, as much as I wanted to think that there's some greater good, when such a high percentage of the country doesn't care about facts, doesn't care about truth, is only, social media is obviously making this worse. I don't necessarily and this is personally, right? I'm not saying for any, I don't personally want to take the effort and say, hey, Trump supporter who right now on Twitter is or on Facebook is spewing these voter fraud lies, which are lies. They're lies. And the media did a shitty job in 2016 calling out these lies. I think they're doing a lot better in 2020. But I just don't think that it's worth my time as an individual to try to stop the racism, the homophobia, the xenophobia, and I'm very lucky in my line of work that most federal judges, none of the congressional staff that I work with are Trumpers. They're not. They're just not. They're all like Jeb Bush, Ted Cruz, Carly Fiorina, John Kasich types, which may have its own issues, but it's not. It's based in the world of reality and based in the world of facts. I don't know the answer. I don't know how to get, and frankly, it's one thing, Jeremy and I, well, you're both Jeremy. One of the Jeremy, a friend, who voted for Trump in the primary in 2016. And I explained to him, and his wife was like, this is not, there's certain reasons that this is not okay. It's not Jeb Bush. It's not John Kasich. It's not even, Ted Cruz, who I think would probably be more effective in all this craziness than Trump, but, at least he's generally tethered to reality. There are reasons why this is dangerous. And, he changed his vote and he voted for Biden this time. And that's, but like the vast majority of people are just digging in. They're buying bigger and bigger flags to attach to their boats and their houses. And it's just, to me, I think we're way past the point. Personally, again, this is me personally, especially when, I'm in such a place of privilege as a white guy, having a job. Like, I just always think about, okay, yeah, I should really understand the other side, what they're saying, where they're coming from. But like, am I expecting my friends of color to also try to? No. So I've sort of gone off the cliff here, but that's where my
I would just say though that not all Trump supporters are QAnon believers who think that COVID-19 is a hoax and climate change is a hoax.
Enough of them are, and that's just, I'm working with the ADL right now on a letter to Speaker McCarthy saying, hey guys, let's not put QAnon supporters on committees. Let's Steve King them. Let's take them off committees. And like, that's fucked up. That is messed up that this is the way I have to spend my time is talking to the ADL in 2020 to try to get not conspiracy theorists not on my committees of jurisdiction. Like, that's not happening on the left. And the asymmetric polarization is just out of control. And the fact that the asymmetric post-Tea Party asymmetric polarization moved from just being, politically on the outskirts to just like totally untethered from facts is not something that I'm willing to engage in.
So Gabe, let me, and maybe I'll throw it to Jeremy first. You're labeling, you mentioned several Republicans, right? Cruz and Kasich, et cetera, who you feel, and I'm going to label comfortable with as a realistic person to run government. You might not agree with their policies, but you would, in your defeat, like if they won the president election, you wouldn't be like, oh, the world is going to blow up, right? Or we're going to believe.
Probably less likely to put kids in cages or to put Chris Kobach as the head of a fake voter.
So you took it to Trump. I didn't necessarily ask that question. What I asked was, how do we talk to the other side? So I want to throw this back out to both of you as like, I didn't label the other side Trump. I labeled the sides Democrats and Republicans, and I would argue that there was bad rhetoric. Let's leave fake news aside for a moment. That's a different episode. But let's like, how does Nancy Pelosi begin to talk to John Kasich, and how do your friends at the dinner table, as Jeremy was talking about before, who, yes, maybe one casted a vote for Trump because they're always going to vote Republican. Trump just happens to be on the ticket, or they abstained because they just couldn't vote for a Republican and they couldn't vote for Trump. How do we talk to our friends? I don't believe, Gabe, that it's your responsibility or my responsibility or Jeremy's responsibility to convince everyone to come on over to the good side, whatever that good side may be. But how do we really talk to people in the political world? Maybe, Gabe, you're saying that it already is happening and just there's one individual who it's not, and he happens to be the leader of the free world. Jeremy or Gabe want to chime in on?
Look, I mean, I think Trump is different in a million ways, like I think, there's a fear right now about what he'll do now, again, 2 weeks from now, maybe we already know the answer to these questions, but what he'll do if he loses over the next 2-3 months until the next president comes in. And I think probably most Americans, especially on the left, would feel more comfortable during that period if Mike Pence was in charge, because he probably wouldn't be as crazy as Donald Trump would be in that period of time when he has nothing to lose and just wants to like make a mess of everything. Trump is different than a lot of elected Republicans, but at the same time, the party has become so Trumpified that it is kind of hard to distinguish between him and his supporters, who obviously, you know, he puts out a tweet and says something, and they all parrot exactly what he's saying with, you know, with no questions about it. So I don't know. I think we're going down a rabbit hole, Jeremy, of trying to figure out the difference between Trump and other Republicans.
Don't you think if he loses, that, and at this point it again, it's 2:30 on the 5th. It looks like he will lose, but by a narrow margin. Depending on what you're reading, I guess that might say the opposite. But don't you think that, let's say that if the next Republican nominee, whoever it is, the Republicans will fall in line with that individual as well, whether it's whomever it is, Nikki Haley, Tim Scott, whoever it is, doesn't matter. Don't you think they'll support that person and the Trumpism will float away?
I don't.
Yeah, go ahead, Gabe.
No, I look. I think that you know, obviously, I'm very frustrated at the state of the world right now, and I've just, you know, I've been, you know, trying to make heads or tails of the way things are going. I work in politics. I hear this every day. Talk to people about this every day. It's been an exhausting 5 years and 4 months since the candidate declared himself. It's been an exhausting period of time. And yeah, I mean, I hope that you know, once we're past this, it'll be easier to have these conversations, because there isn't a 270-pound elephant in the room. You know, to me, that the larger issue is, you know, when you think about the bonds that bind us as Americans, you know, they're becoming more frayed. People don't join churches and bowling leagues. I mean, we know all this. They're the suburb. You know, more and more people are living. You know, the rural versus urban divide is getting greater. The blue area versus red area is getting greater. You know, I think that there you know, a few things would help. One is, I think the news industry needs to be reimagined. There's a bill to make news nonprofit news outlets nonprofits, which I think would, you know, and then you'd have folks saying, okay, well, if you're a news agency and you have this nonprofit status and you're advocating for a candidate, you're going to lose your
Well, but by the way, just to put it out there, I have spent the last 20 years working in a nonprofit news organization, so they do exist.
Exactly. No, that's why I said that, because I remember that bill. You know, I think there's another bill in Congress that needs to be strengthened, that would essentially give Shevut Atzmi, what's it in English? Like a year of service, Shevut Leumi, not Shevut Atzmi, like a year of national service for people to go into different parts of the country. So, you know, whether it be AmeriCorps or Peace Corps or City Year or whatever, like the idea that I definitely agree that you know, if you're living in Minneapolis in a blue area and you go out to like rural Idaho for a year or two, I think that there are lessons that both the people in Idaho and the people in Minneapolis can learn. So I think there are at the margins things to improve. But I think, you know, I honestly just think it's going to get a lot worse before it gets a lot better. And I think that there's got to be, I mean, I hate to say this, but I'm sort of waiting for whatever that next tragedy is. You know, we started the episode talking about it, to bring us back together, because outside of that, I thought COVID was going to be it, right? Like if we, you know, if we can't have a pandemic where 235,000 people died, bring us together, maybe it's something worse. I don't know what that is, but you know, seems to be that there has to be some outside event that is divorced from politics. Obviously, COVID was not divorced from politics, because only, you know, because mask wearing became political for some stupid reason. So I think that some sort of outside event will have to bring us together. But for the time being, you know, I know you know, you want to. When you sent me the email about this episode seemed a little bit kumbaya. I'm not there yet, Jeremy, or other Jeremy.
Oh, that's fair. I think
I feel like we're several decades away from getting out of the hole that the last 10 or 15 years of social media and the last 5 years of Trump have dug for us. So check on me again when I'm 53.
I hope it does. No, social media absolutely plays a role. Jeremy, any thoughts on like the healing? Which I'm
look,
glad
and by the way, while I have this angelic light shining on there, I'll just say I just read this book a couple of months ago and interviewed the author of it, and it's a book called Tribes by David Lammy, who's this Black Labour member of Parliament in the UK, who talks about the fact that he's from an actual African tribe ancestrally. His family also comes from Guyana. He's from a tribe of people who grew up in London. He's from a tribe of his neighborhood. He's from a tribe in terms of being a Black Englishman. And he talks about how we end up associating with these different tribes throughout our lives. And of course, political tribes are a huge part of that too. I think that, getting the incentive of money out of it, and going to Gabe's point about the media, about money in politics, people that exploit these tribes that we find ourselves in and divide us, I think is a big part of that problem. And social media is huge in that too, because, if you look at, he talks in this book about even, people who've been radicalized as terrorists, and how that ends up happening to them. And a lot of that ends up being, social media, that's where they're getting their information. That's who's driving them in a certain direction. And then they end up going in and committing a terrorist attack or something like that. But I think that's sort of key to it. Like you started this off by saying that you guys went to camp together and you and I were in a fraternity together. That's a piece of my life that I think of as a positive piece of my life. The fact that I was at NPR for a long time, I think it was a positive piece of my life. That I'm half Jewish. On my mom's side, I'm half English on my dad's side. Those are all pieces of my identity. If there were ever a war between the Jews and the Brits, I don't know how it'd come down, frankly.
Well, I hope you're on my team. We need all the help we can get. So yeah, I think that, I think you both talked about it. I once had a dinner. I was doing a speaking gig as a rabbinical student, and I stayed at someone's home, and he was telling me that the greatest, this was years ago, right? I was still a student. And he said that not serving your country is a huge problem because you don't take into account how fragile it is. And I don't think he meant go to war per se, Gabe. There's other ways to serve your country, but to understand to give of yourself to something, a larger whole. And right now, besides taxes, and they're really, we don't owe anything. We take, or we want to take. And that is a holistic issue, I think, that Americans suffer from. There's too much emphasis on the self and just what I'm doing today and what that will do to me, and how, and that includes everyone. That includes all sides. That includes everyone who votes. You vote for usually what's going to make your situation better. And that is, if we could serve the country in some form, Gabe, I would be, and now granted, we would probably be aged out of that requirement. It's easier to say, but if they told me my children had to, I would say, yes, I think that's important. And again, I don't think I'd want my daughters to go maybe fight overseas, but they could, certainly live in another area. Maybe it's religion. Maybe we spent, yeah.
No, I was saying if you think about American history, one of the greatest influences in terms of breaking down some barriers along racial lines and breaking down some barriers on LGBT lines has been the military, right? Mm-hmm. The first, when the military integrated in the 40s and 50s, that was a huge step. Obviously, it didn't, do everything. It did 1/10 of everything, but it was that step was probably larger than any other single thing that happened to improve racial relations. And one of the biggest drivers, I think, of same-sex marriage and full equality for LGBTQ citizens was the fight against Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I think that really got a lot of people thinking, changed a lot of people's thinking, saying, okay, well, if gay people can't serve, that's ridiculous, and okay, then they can serve, then of course they should marry. I feel like, it was, maybe a little bit of a bank shot, but it got us to a better situation today. So I do, again, the last 5 years aside, I do think that, if we find, our brethren between the 30-yard lines or between the 40-yard lines, and they may not be right here, but they may be somewhere else in the country, and we can work with them together, obviously not as 38-year-olds, but maybe our kids when they're 18, then I think that would do a whole lot of that. And not, those are my two solutions for the day, trying to be positive is nonprofit news and year of national service. But beyond walking a mile in someone's shoes and just, messing with the far left and the far right news organizations that are exploiting us, I got nothing else. So hopefully the Jeremys can save us on any other accounts.
Jeremy, anything else to add?
No, I think that's a good ender there.
All right. So I want to thank both my guests. It's fixthecourt.com.
Yes.
JeremyHobson.com. Is that a thing?
No, but Jeremy Hobson on Twitter. There you go.
Jeremy Hobson on Twitter. So follow both these guys. Appreciate your time and your dedication. And Gabe, we will make this world a better place. I'm a rabbi. I have to say that. So I'll need your partnership.
Not like me, because my dad's a rabbi. So I'm just
fair enough. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.